2021's Blood in the Water is the 14th album by thrashers Flotsam and Jetsam. For some reason, these guys have always been more of a lower tier thrash metal band, and I don't really understand why. I personally like these guys a lot more than some of the bigger tier thrash bands. It's a bit early in the year, but so far, Blood in the Water is one of my favorite albums of 2021. The only contenders being the albums released by Orden, Ogun, and Evergrey, a couple of albums I'll be coming back to talk about later. The production is solid, I really like the sound of the guitars, the drums sound phenomenal, and I really like Eric's voice. If I had to say anything negative about this album, it would be that they really don't break any new ground. It does seem a bit formulaic at times, and with 12 songs, it does feel a little bit long, but I'm not going to complain about a consistently good album that has more to it. I'm also not a big fan of the guitar solos on this album. I'm glad they're there because the songs are better for having them than not, but I feel like they could have been done better. There are a few exceptions, but most of them sound the same. But as I said, the production is solid. I think the playing is pretty good, especially the drums. This is one of my favorite albums for drums. Eric's voice is on point. I personally think he's the best vocalist in thrash. He can actually sing, unlike a lot of the other thrash metal vocalists. There are also some pretty solid guitar riffs throughout the album. And what really gets me about this album is consistency. The worst songs on this album are still listenable, bordering on filler, but I wouldn't quite put them in that territory. And there are 5 or 6 really good standout tracks on here. And the rest of the songs are pretty damn solid too. So it's a very consistent album in terms of song quality. The album opens with the thunderous title track, Blood in the Water. This song is on a very short list of songs that I absolutely love that have come out in 2021. The song starts off slow-paced, but builds quickly to a fast-paced thrasher, then slowing a little bit in the intro. And during this part, and I say slow, it's still pretty fast. There's a really nice guitar melody that plays over this part that I like a lot. This is a song that the drumming really stands out to me, and drums aren't something I really pay much attention to. It's usually just guitars and vocals. But like I said before, the drums on this album are pretty solid, and this is definitely a standout for them as well. Once the song gets going into its verses, the verses are fairly standard thrash metal verses, but for some reason they really work for me on this track. The vocals, the rhythm guitars, and the drums all come together nicely. And they build nicely into a really, really good chorus. I really like this chorus a lot. The melodies are phenomenal. The drums, the guitars, everything comes together really well for this chorus. And I'm a sucker for a catchy chorus. And the best part is I don't feel like it's trying to be super catchy, and it just works for me. The solo's a bit too short and doesn't really do a lot for me, but it's serviceable. But the rest of the song is phenomenal. This is definitely one of my favorite songs of the first half of 2021. Burn the Sky is another standout track. This one again is a pretty fast-paced thrasher. I like that the verses are different from the previous track, even though they're both faster paced. This song has 2 sections that could be a solid chorus, which is pretty impressive considering there are a lot of songs out there that don't have one decent chorus. The first being the build of the chorus, which is a bit slower, and I think follows the verses very nicely. And then the song picks up for the actual chorus, which is a lot faster and kind of reminds me a bit of power metal, with Eric singing at a lot higher pitch than normal. The solo I'm indifferent to. It's a bit short and doesn't really do anything interesting, but overall I really like the pacing of this track. I really like the melodies, and this is another standout for me. Brace for Impact is yet another thrasher. This one falls under the typical thrash metal style, and this one is also a grower for me. I never thought this song was bad, but on my first couple of listens, it didn't really do much for me. But the last time I listened to it, it really started to grow on me. The verses are pretty typical thrash. The chorus doesn't really do anything special, but it's not bad. This is the part that's grown on me a bit more. I like the solo a lot better than on the two previous tracks, and I like the sound of the clean guitars in the slower part of the song just after the solo. I think it's a nice change for the song and does help this song to stand out a little bit more. Next we have A Place to Die, and it really says something about how awesome this album is, when out of the first 4 tracks, this is the slowest of the 4, because this is still a fast-paced song. The guitars and drums during the verses have this galloping pacing, something kind of similar to Iron Maiden. It's a nice change and a good way to still do a fast-paced song but differentiate it from the previous tracks. The chorus is a bit slower, it's pretty melodic, and it reminds me a lot of something that would have been on the previous album. The solo again doesn't do a whole lot for me, but it does seem to be a bit longer than the previous tracks, which I do like. And this is another standout track for me. Next we have The Walls. This song hasn't really done anything for me in previous listens, and still is one of my least favorite songs on the album. It's an upper mid-tempo song, which again makes this the slowest paced song we've had to this point, which is still a very good sign for this album. It's a bit softer, but I would not call it a soft track. The guitars during the verses have kind of this galloping rhythm to them, not quite like the previous track, but still a bit reminiscent of either Maiden, or I get more of an Iced Earth vibe from the guitars in the verses to this track. This one feels like more of a standard metal song rather than a thrash song. I really like the verses a lot. I like the pacing, I like the melodies, and I like the change of pace for the album, but the chorus doesn't do a whole lot for me. It's not bad, but it's not enough to really stand out. And the solo again doesn't really do much for me. It's still just a bunch of notes being played at a fairly high speed, and a song like this, which is a bit more melodic, I feel like needs a more melodic solo where he actually holds on some notes a little bit, which is really my issue with all of the solos on this album. I've said before there's not a bad song on this album, and that's still the case with this track, but this is one of my lesser favorites on the album. The album gets even slower with the ballad Cry for the Dead. This is the first actual slow song we've had thus far. It's a nice change from all the fast-paced songs we've had to this point, but I don't really have a whole lot to say about it. I'm pretty picky when it comes to ballads, and this is actually a pretty decent one. I just don't have a whole lot to say about it. The solo still has the same problems I've had with all the solos to this point, so I'm not going to harp on that anymore. And I really like the addition to the chorus that comes in the second chorus, also happens in the third as well. There's some really nice melodies during that part where he actually says, "Cry for the dead." It's a good song, but like I said, I just don't have much to say about it. The Wicked Hour is another standout track for me. It's another fast-paced song, which is nice after the ballad. It still has its own unique feel to it, and there are quite a few change-ups during this song. The verses are really fast-paced. As the song builds towards the chorus, it changes pace a bit, going more to an upper mid-tempo pace. And this song has probably my second favorite chorus on the album. I really like the vocals. The melodies are really good on this chorus. The solo does start with a slower part finally, but it's just a repeated pattern, and the rest of the solo have the same issues as I've had with pretty much every solo we've had on this album. Still, it's a really good track. Next we have Too Many Lives. This song is an upper mid-tempo song. I really like the drumming in this track. It reminds me a lot of something Rob Halford would do. Mainly I think of his solo stuff, in particular the album Crucible, possibly something he might have done with Fight. Even the effects used on Eric's voice in this song remind me of a particular song by Halford, but I can't remember which band he was in at the time. There's a good guitar riff in the verses, and the chorus doesn't stand out to me, but it serves its purpose well enough. And this song has the best solo on the album. It's not one of my favorite solos of all time, but at least there's some memorable melodies in that solo. And it's not all speed, which is nice. although there is some of that too. Grey Dragon is another fun, fast-paced thrasher. I really like the chorus in this one as well. And this probably has my second favorite guitar solo on the album. Regression is just another one of those songs that's fine. There's not really anything special about it. It's another one of my least favorite tracks on the album, but it's still pretty decent. I do like the slower part in the bridge of the song, and it does have a nice pacing to it. But there's not a whole lot that's allowed me to connect with this track yet. Undone starts with a bit of a groovier section, which is unique for this album. It's another faster paced song, but it does have its own unique vibe. And this one also has one of the better solos on the album. It might even compete with the other track that I thought had the best solo. It's not one of my favorite songs, but it's still pretty decent. The album ends with the song 7 Seconds Till the End of the World. This is not only a standout song on this album, which there's been a bunch of them, but this is one of my favorite songs on the album. Probably my third favorite song on the album, I would guess. It's another fast-paced track, but again, it has its own vibe to it. I really like the build towards the chorus, and the chorus is another really good chorus. And again, we get another pretty decent solo for this album. One of the 3 or 4 best solos on the album. This is a really good way to end the album. At the end of the day, Blood in the Water ends up being a really good collection of songs by this band, and will probably be one of my favorite albums of theirs. It's easily my favorite album of the first half of 2021, and will definitely be in my top 5 favorite albums of the year. If you have not heard this album yet and you're a fan of this band, I would highly recommend it. You will not be disappointed.